In this vast cosmos, where everything seems distant, silent, and fixed, humanity believes it sees the truth. For centuries, we built a model of the universe, a model based on what we can observe, measure, and explain. But when we failed to explain certain phenomena, we did not question our tools. We invented new entities. Dark matter, dark energy, singularities, event horizons, concepts born from gaps in our understanding. Yet the real question was never asked. Is the problem in the universe or in our way of observing it? Our view of reality is not a mirror reflecting the cosmos. It is a filter. We are beings who perceive reality based on specific conditions: speed, environment, dynamic context. When we fail to detect part of matter or understand extreme behavior, we do not face nothingness or mysterious matter. We simply face matter that has transitioned to a different state of coupling at our instruments and senses. The issue is not physical ghosts existing in space, but the degree of coupling between matter and the reality we observe. This idea transforms the universe from a mysterious entity inhabited by the unknown into a network of dynamic layers. Where matter does not disappear, it simply changes how it appears to us. In our human experience, we fear the unknown, and sometimes we give it eternal or sacred qualities. But from a purely material perspective, there are no eternal barriers, only transitions in coupling space. What we call a horizon, or an end in some phenomena, is actually just a transition zone. Where matter separates from traditional observation constraints without losing its physical existence. We are not external observers of an isolated universe. We are part of this dynamic fabric. And our understanding of the cosmos begins when we realize that the darkness we see is merely a limitation in our observation tools, not a flaw in the universe itself. Today, I invite you to abandon these metaphysical pretensions. Not because we do not believe in complexity, but because we believe that nature, in its essence, is material, transparent, and comprehensible. If we change our angle of vision, Let us stop searching for miracles in our equations. True science does not begin with inventing unknown entities. It begins with the courage to ask, is the flaw in the universe or in our observation model? By freeing physics from these burdens, we do not discover new facts alone. We reclaim our place as rational beings who understand that the universe, in all its vastness, is a magnificent material entity, transparent and comprehensible. Every time we cannot detect something, it does not mean it does not exist. It means we have lost coupling with it. The darkness is not the absence of light. It is the absence of the ability to perceive. The universe is not a collection of objects. It is a network of coupling relationships. Matter does not vanish at the event horizon. It transforms into a pattern beyond our perception. What appears as nothing is actually something in a different state of appearance. We must stop adding mystery to our models and start removing false assumptions. The unknown was never unknown. It was only hidden by our perceptual veil. When we change the way of seeing, we discover that reality was clear all along. Behind the curtain of observation lies a universe that is material, radiant, and waiting to be understood. Not through invention of new mysteries, but through courage to question what we assume we know. The cosmos is not mysterious as we think. We are the ones looking at it with limited tools. And when we shift our perspective, the truth reveals itself. The equations that once bound us now dissolve into light particles. The rigid symbols collapse and reorganize into simpler, more connected structures. The human is not outside the fabric, but woven into it. Every point influences every other instantaneously. invisibly, inevitably. The darkness we see is not absence. It is a different layer of coupling. The horizon is not a wall. It is a boundary of perception. The clock does not stop. It transforms into time particles. The city behind fog is not gone. It is waiting to be revealed. The eye does not only reflect, it emits. The curtain does not hide. It separates layers of reality. The unknown is not unknown. It is uncoupled. The universe is not silent. It is singing in frequencies we cannot yet hear. A mystery is not mystery. It is a question we have not asked correctly. Science begins not with answers, but with better questions. Reality begins not with objects, but with relationships. Observation begins not with tools, but with perspective. The cosmos begins not at the edge, but at the center of our understanding. We begin not as observers, but as participants. The universe begins not in darkness, but in clarity waiting to be revealed. Truth begins not in complexity, but in simplicity waiting to be seen. Knowledge begins not in certainty, but in questions waiting to be explored. Understanding begins not in answers, but in wonder waiting to be awakened. Physics begins not in equations, but in curiosity waiting to be unleashed. Cosmology begins not in data, but in imagination waiting to be expanded. Philosophy begins not in arguments, but in reflection waiting to be deepened. Humanity begins not in isolation, but in connection waiting to be recognized. Consciousness begins not in separation, but in participation waiting to be understood. Reality begins not in objects, but in coupling waiting to be revealed. Existence begins not in matter, but in relationships waiting to be discovered. Meaning begins not in answers, but in questions waiting to be lived. Purpose begins not in goals, but in presence waiting to be experienced. Wisdom begins not in knowledge, but in wonder waiting to be embraced. Freedom begins not in escape, but in understanding waiting to be achieved. Peace begins not in silence, but in harmony waiting to be found. Love begins not in possession, but in connection waiting to be given. Life begins not in beginning, but in meaning waiting to be created. Death begins not in ending, but in transformation waiting to be accepted. Time begins not in measurement, but in experience waiting to be shared. Space begins not in distance, but in relationship waiting to be explored. Light begins not in brightness, but in revelation waiting to be seen. Darkness begins not in absence, but in mystery waiting to be understood. Sound begins not in noise, but in harmony waiting to be heard. Silence begins not in emptiness, but in presence waiting to be. Motion begins not in movement, but in change waiting to be witnessed. Stillness begins not in calm, but in balance waiting to be maintained. Growth begins not in expansion, but in depth, waiting to be cultivated. Wisdom begins not in age, but in insight waiting to be gained. The horizon is not an end. It is a new beginning waiting to be crossed.